Hi, I'm Mike Powell, world record holder in the long jump, 29 feet, 4.5 inches. I've also won 2 world championships in 1991, 1993, and also 2 silver medals in Olympic Games in 1988 and 1992. I've been coaching now for 8 years. For the last 2 years, I've been here at UCLA. Today, we're going to talk about the long jump. We're going to break it down to 4 different sessions: the approach, the takeoff, the flight, and the landing. Let's get ready to jump. Before we get started, let's figure out who makes a good long jumper. First of all, you need somebody who's fast, then also somebody who can jump pretty high or far, and then also somebody who's athletic enough to take that speed and take into the air and land without killing themselves. First, let's talk about the approach. Now, the approach is 90% of the jump. It determines your speed, your rhythm, and your accuracy at the board. Now, in future DVDs, I'm going to talk more about running mechanics, but in the approach, your running mechanics are really important, so I want to emphasize a few points that you want to work on with your athletes or with yourselves. First and foremost, you want to run on the balls of your feet. This is the springiest part of your body, and you want to have a nice springy, bouncy run when you're going down the runway. Also, you want to make sure when you hit the ground that your foot hits directly below your hips. You get the most power there and get your hips up as high as possible. You want to have your hips high throughout the run and at takeoff, because speed times height equals distance. Now also, you want to have your hips tucked underneath you. You don't want them going too far forward or too far back. You want them in a neutral position underneath you. Same time, you want to have your head over top of your hips, so a straight line going from your head all the way down your torso to your feet. And also when you're running, make sure your arms are going straight forward and straight backward, from the shoulder height down to the hip pocket. Any movement going across the body is going to slow you down. The more time you spend on the ground, the slower you're going to go and the less high you're going to jump. Okay, one more thing about running mechanics before we get into the jumping. Dorsiflexion is really important in sprinting and in jumping. Now, Grace and Chris here are going to help me give you an example of how important dorsiflexion is. When you're sprinting, you want to have your knee get to this position as soon as possible. And what helps you get there quickly is to dorsiflex. That means pick up the toe, as opposed to plantar flexion, pointing the toe down. So pick up the toe, that activates the hip flexor and the gastroc and get the knee up faster. Now, to show you the difference, you want to provide force going up. And to show you the difference between dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, I'm going to show you right now with Grace. So Grace, hold on to Chris. Lift up your right leg. Okay, now first we're going to put her in a plantar flex position. And I'm going to ask her to resist. I'm going to push down, and you see that she can barely resist me. Okay, now lift the leg up and go in a dorsiflex position. Now hold, and you can see how much stronger she is. I put almost all my whole weight on her body. So when you're sprinting, it's really important to dorsiflex first, because you can get your leg up faster, and when you're jumping, you can get your knee up faster and block faster. So dorsiflexion is really important. I covered it here a little bit, but wait for the sprinting videos, and you get a lot more from that. Okay, so before we get started on going down the runway, we got to start with your check marks first, with your walk up. Now, when you first start your approach, you can do it 4 different ways. You can do it standing and then start running, similar to what like Carl Lewis did. Now, that was kind of difficult for me because my steps were inconsistent. I like to have a rhythm going into my run. Then you can do it walking, take a few steps walking like this, and then go into your run. Then you can also do it skipping a little bit into your run to develop a little bit of speed. And then also you can do it running. Also, you find a mark, you run to the mark and hit the mark and then start running. Now really, it doesn't make a difference. It's all personal preference. The main thing is that it's consistent every time. So when you're doing your warm-up, you're at the start of your run, you have to do the same thing every time. So if you're going to stand here and stand still, you have a check mark at your first step going down. So if you're starting on your right foot first, you put a mark on the side of the runway, and every time you start your approach, you step out and hit that mark every single time. And you should have somebody watching you do it in practice also to make sure you're consistent. It's kind of hard to see where your foot is sometimes, especially when you're running at full speed. Now the same thing with the walk up. Now if my run was going to start here, I might start walking from here first and say take 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, then go. The main thing is, again, to hit that mark. Now, I also said you can start skipping. You might start skipping a little bit and then start running into your mark. Once again, the main thing is just hitting the mark each time. Now for me, when I competed, I did kind of a combination. I walked and then I had 2 skipping steps and I hit my mark each time. My mark is 24 feet, okay? That's how long my walk up is, and then my run was 156 feet. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I did. And the thing is, you can have your own personality on it. Some people like to create like a little rhythm, a little dance, because the approach is about your rhythm. So do what you want to do to make it fun. This is what I did. Before we get started, we got to figure out how many steps you want to take in your approach. Now, typically a high school athlete, you want to have them take no more than 16 steps, which would be 8 cycles for the beginning athlete. You might want to move them back to 9 cycles, which is 18 steps, or maybe even 10 cycles, but I wouldn't suggest more than 10 cycles for any athlete. And we talk about a cycle, what we're talking about is counting from when one foot picks up off the ground and that foot hits the ground again. Because it's kind of difficult to count every step. You don't want to go on the runway thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 all the way down. So you count just your jump foot. So you start running and you count every time your jump foot hits the ground. So you started running, you would count 1, 2, 3 that way with just your jump leg if you're a left foot jumper, or conversely if you're a right foot jumper. So try to make it more simple. So remember, 8 cycles to start off with. If the athlete's a little more experienced, go back to 9 cycles. And for most world-class athletes, it's 10 cycles, which is 20 steps. Okay, now let's start breaking down the approach. Now the approach is divided into 4 different parts. You have your drive phase, the transition phase, the attack phase, and then the takeoff phase, which is the penultimate step, or what I call the push-pull plant. We'll break that down later. Right now, let's start off with the drive phase. Now the drive phase is similar to a runner coming out of the blocks. You start down low, and then you slowly start coming up. It's called the drive phase because you're not sprinting, you're driving. You're pushing back against the ground, so as opposed to picking up the foot and pulling the ground. Okay, so the drive phase, you want to think about having the eyes down. Okay, you want to use that forward momentum. With your body leaning forward, you're using that momentum to get your speed going. So you think about your shin angle. The shin angle is going to be going backwards as opposed to hitting underneath you. You're pushing back. Your hips are going to be tilted a little bit forward. You still want to keep that straight line from your head down to the ground. That gives you the most power. So eyes down, hips tilted forward, head down a little bit. And you also want to make sure you have big arms. Whenever you're driving out of the blocks or when you're in a driving position, you want to make sure your arms, your hands always come up to shoulder height. So if you're leaning forward, your shoulder down lower, but you still got to bring the arms up bigger. So just like come out of the blocks, make sure the hands come up to shoulder height. Okay? So think about pushing back, keeping the eyes down, and driving the arms back nice and big. Now, one way to work on the drive phase is to have your athlete or yourself stand on the balls of your feet, start to fall forward, and just before you feel like you're going to fall, pick up your foot, pick up the toe, dorsiflex, and pick it up and push back into the ground, and try to push back into the ground, driving the arms to keep your momentum from falling over. So like I said, similar to being in the blocks in this position, when you come out, drive the arms big and pick up the feet. The same thing in the beginning of the approach. You start running, you're down, not as far, but you still want to keep your balance and keep your momentum by picking up your feet. So one way to work on that is to stand here, fall forward, and then pick up your feet and push back against the ground. I'm going to show another drill right now, how to work on the drive phase. But before I get started, I want to introduce one of my athletes, Grace Upshaw, 2-time national champion outdoors, 1-time indoors, as well as Olympic finalist and also world championship finalist also. Okay, so what Grace is going to do, we're going to pull the sled, and the sled really mimics the motion in the drive phase really well. Okay, Grace. If you don't have a sled, you can try different ways. You can use a jacket or a towel or some sweatpants or something like that. You can create resistance by just putting the towel or jacket around the athlete's waist and holding back. Have them lean forward a little bit so you catch their weight. Okay, and now go into your drive phase. You can hold them back this way and work on the drive phase that way also. Okay, now we're going to go to the transition phase. And basically the transition phase just means you're going from driving, being down in this position, going from a drive phase to a sprint phase, or I call the attack phase. So in the transition, just like when you come out of the blocks, you're down this position, you want to start to come up slowly. You don't want to pop up too soon and ruin your rhythm and your momentum. So what I have my athletes think about doing, thinking about the running drills, you're driving in the drive phase, in the transition phase, you start to pick up the toe, dorsiflex, pick up and start to step up over the opposite knee and start to pull into hip extension. So you get your hips up nice and tall and you get your body up nice and tall. Now you're still keeping your speed though, you pick up speed slowly with each step. Now, so there's some different things you can think about when you're doing that. For me, when I competed, I would have my head down on the drive phase, and on the transition phase, I would start coming up slowly. I had 3 cycles on my transition phase, so I would think to myself, come up to the runway, that's one phase, and then my eyes would go down to the pit for the second, and then up on the horizon for the third. That brings you up slowly, because whenever your head goes, your hips are going to follow. So it's an easy way of getting your body from that from the drive phase to the sprint phase, a nice, easy transition. One other way you might want to do it is tell the athlete to think about their eyes and looking at the numbers on the clock. If they're driving and they're looking down at 6 o'clock, then have them look up slowly to 5 o'clock, to 4 o'clock, and to 3 o'clock. Once again, you fooled your body into getting up into a nice sprint position without losing your balance or your rhythm. The next phase is the attack phase, or the sprint phase. Now remember, when you're long jumping, you're only going to run at optimal speed. And optimal speed means the speed that you can handle at takeoff. So although you're in your attack phase, I don't like to call it the sprint phase because it's not like running on the track. Okay, so you're going to run at optimal speed. That means the speed that you can handle at takeoff and still get up in the air. Now in the attack phase, you're coming out of the transition, coming to a tall running position, hips underneath you, lifting the knees nice and tall, on the balls of the feet, nice and springy and bouncy, arms being really aggressive, head up, and your eyes should be on the horizon. Once you come up out of your transition phase and go into the attack phase, the head shouldn't go down anymore. Because when you come out the back, you're going to start down low and start coming up and run right off into the distance. So you don't want your head to go down. You're going to ruin your hip position. So in the attack phase, think about being light in the ground, putting big force into the ground, get off the ground quick, nice and light and springy, head up, and get ready to go into the takeoff. Now we're going to get to the takeoff, or the penultimate step, which is the next to last step before you jump, or as what I call it, the push-pull plant. Okay? Now the object of the takeoff at the penultimate step is for you to come from a high hip position down to a flat foot position, because you want your hips to go down lower, a long step, then into a short step. That long step, the hips are down. The short step, the hips come up, and the angle also changes, starts to go upward. So what you're doing, instead of going in there and trying to jump, you're going in there and trying to position your hips so that they're going up in the air. So at the end of the jump, all you have to do is just punch your elbows and block your knee, and you go up in the air. And that way you can carry your speed off the board as opposed to coming in the board and really loading up and putting force down. Now a lot of jumpers jump that way, but what happens, remember what I said earlier, the more time you spend on the ground, the less high you go and the slower you go. Think of it this way. When you put force into the ground, the less time on the ground, the more spring, the more speed. The more time on the ground, the less speed, and the more all that energy that's built up in your leg just disperses throughout the ground. So always teach your athlete to be quick off the ground. Now we're going to talk about the push-pull plant, which is really a high-tech move. It might be a little more difficult for your high school athletes, but you can start off with some beginning moves first. The first thing you'll have your athlete think about doing is think about just being quick. The last 2 steps being really quick off the ground, because you always want to have to accelerate into the board. The next level would be to tell them to go to a flat foot on the penultimate step, like so, and then biomechanically they'll end up going to a shorter step. Now to spend a little more time on the push-pull plant, this is the thing that really made me go 29 feet 4.5 inches. Okay, you push off your jump foot into the penultimate step. We're pushing into it because you are going to a flat foot, therefore you're going to lose speed. Okay, so to make sure that you don't lose as much speed, you push into the step as opposed to dropping into it. Now, what you do when you're pushing off your jump foot, you pick up the opposite foot, dorsiflex, step up over the opposite calf as opposed to the knee when you're sprinting, step with the opposite calf, go to a block position and extend from the opposite hip and go flat to a flat foot, nice and solid. That's the push, and this is the start of the pull. Now, just before the foot hits the ground, you start to pull the heel back. pull the heel back and rock over the foot to pull the body through, making sure you're not settling at any time, because when you settle, you lose speed. And remember, you're going to a flat foot already, so you want to keep as much speed as possible. So we're going to push, go to the pull, pull through, and pull the jump foot through. A long step to a short step. No settling in the hips. The hip angle changes from here to there. It's a low heel recovery. So when you go from the penultimate step to the ultimate step, which is the takeoff, it's a short heel recovery, not a high one. Push, pull, plant. Push, pull, plant. Now this is one drill that you can use to work on the push, pull, plant. First is a push, block, hold. Push from the jump foot, block the opposite knee, and hit the ground solid. Make sure that there's a straight line going from the knee down over to the ankle, straight line from the shoulder down to the hips. You don't want to be too forward here. You lose your speed, and also it's not a very safe position for your knees. And you don't want to go bending here either, because then you're going to lower your hips and it's slower also. This is a much more powerful position. So this is the first movement. You practice the first movement first. Step over, block and hold, hit solid. And have them push back. Step over, block and hold, hit solid, push back. Do that about 4 or 5 times. Now, the second part of that drill is the pull. Now, instead of hitting flat this time, now we're going to pull the ground, okay, and pull hips over top of the ground. So the first movement was this, push, block, hold, and stop. Now we're going to push before you hit the ground, pull through. Nice and solid, no settling. You don't want to hit and settle, because then you lose your speed and your hip position. Push, block, hold, and pull through. That's the second drill. Now we go to the plant, okay? And that's just really going to be driving and blocking the arms at the takeoff. So the first is a push. Push, pull through. Pull, push through, and plant. Now another drill to work on the plant. Because remember, you want to think about blocking the free knee and blocking the arm going backwards. It's not a feeling of coming in and jumping and trying to power. What you're trying to do is have a low heel recovery and then block the knee, block the elbow, shrug the shoulders, and put the chin up all at the same time to create forces going to the ground. Boom. The faster you block those levers, the more force you're going to put into the ground, and the more force you'll get back from the ground. One thing to keep in mind, you have to make sure you have contact with the ground before you block those levers. If you're in contact with the ground, you're going to get more forces back. If you jump in the air and then you block, you're not going to get any forces back. We'll talk about that a little bit later in our plyometrics video. Okay, now this drill right now, this is to work on the 4 movements for the punch at takeoff. So what I'm going to do to ask Grace is to punch the knee, then punch the elbow, then shrug the shoulders, and then lift the chin up. And then we'll think about focus on all of them at one time. Okay, so here we go. Knee, nose to dorsiflexion. Okay, elbow. Okay, shoulders, chin, everything. Okay, now those are the 5 movements, the 4 movements in the takeoff. You can work on that over and over again. Get your athlete to think about blocking a takeoff instead of trying to jump and try to power the jump. This makes the speed continue off the board. Once you get to your takeoff point, once you leave the ground, the distance you're going to jump, or the maximum distance, is already determined. You can't go in the air and make yourself go further. There's 4 things that go in determining how far your maximum distance can be. It's your speed here at takeoff, the height of your hips, your takeoff angle, and also how much force that you're putting down into the ground. Now from our takeoff from the push-pull plant, we worked on all those things. The speed, we tried to make sure we kept our speed going into the board. The height of the hips, by coming from a long step to a short step. At the same time, the takeoff angle, by changing the hang angle from a low angle to an upward angle. And then the power into the ground by blocking these levers at takeoff. So make sure your athletes really understand that once they leave the ground, all they can do in the air is take away from it or just keep as much of the jump as they can. Now the progression of learning these drills, as with every other part of the approach, is to start off doing some things walking and then maybe skipping. Now the push-pull plant is a difficult movement, so you want to start it off slow. Once you've mastered those drills, now we want to bring it over to the track. And what Grace is going to do is do a short approach jump from 7 steps back, work on the push-pull plant and the takeoff, and just step out into the pit. Now, another drill that you should add into the warm-up and to your workouts is skipping. It really gets the athlete to get used to being on the balls of their feet and pushing off and being quick off the ground. So Chris is going to demonstrate a little skipping for us. Go from the balls of the feet and push off. Hit the heel, roll to the balls of the feet and push off the ground. Nice, easy response. Okay, now we're going to take the small skipping and turn it to a bigger skip, going more vertical. Call it vertical skipping. What we're going to do is dorsal flex off the ground, drive the knee up to a parallel position, the thigh parallel to the ground, drive the arm back, keep the head up, make sure the head's over top of the waist, hold that position, then go down to the ground and skip and change legs and alternate. Okay, Grace is going to demonstrate her perfect technique of vertical skipping. Drive the knee up and hold the position, no dangling, with the toe up. Now what we're going to do is work on the takeoff. So we're going to do short takeoffs over each hurdle off the takeoff leg. Think about the same things we did in the drills earlier. Driving the knee, lifting the toe up, driving the elbow back, shoulders coming up, and chin coming up. So we're going to have a nice quick ground time, big air time. So keep the feet close together. Space the hurdles anywhere from, say, 5 to 8 feet apart, depending on the quality of your athlete. For Grace, we can go about 7 feet right now. She's not going to have much speed. So it's really want to focus on blocking and letting the body rise. Blocking and letting the body rise, quick off the ground. Small ground time, big air. Okay, Grace. Block, block, quick, 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 quick elbow, quick knee. That's great. Okay, now like I said earlier, once you leave the ground, the maximum distance you can go is already predetermined. Now, there's a couple of different styles of your flight. Okay, the main thing you want to do when you're in the air, like I said, is not take away from your total distance. So the main thing you want to do is keep your upper body upright so you slow that forward momentum, because your natural movement is to come off the board. Your body really wants to do a somersault and flip over. They used to do that back in the day. It was kind of crazy, though. But so for now, though, you want to jump off the board and have the torso upright and try to lengthen your body and slow that forward rotation down. Now, you can either do 3 different types of jumping. There's a hang jumping, or like a sail technique. So basically, you punch off the board, go in the air, elongate your body, and try to stay upright as long as possible before you go into your landing. That's a sail technique, hence the position like a sail. Okay, now the next one is a hitch kick, which is called a single hitch kick, or a 1.5. Now, the hitch kick is a little bit better because it promotes speed off the board, because you're running off the board as opposed to trying to jump off the board, which is sometimes what happens when you do the hang style or the sail style. Now, when you do the hitch kick, I'm a left foot jumper, so I would hit my foot at the board, drive my right knee, cycle that through one time, and then lift my left leg up, and then bring my right leg up to the other one. That's a single hitch kick, which is a 1.5. That's probably the most used technique, even at the world-class level. Most women do that, and a lot of men do that also. Now, the next one is a little more difficult. It's the 2.5, which is a double hitch kick. It's a technique that I used, and actually I used it after watching Larry Myrick and Carl Lewis do it for so many years, because it looked a lot cooler too. But you have to be really fast and really strong to get through it. So when you come off the board, instead of just going through on one cycle, you go through one time and then cycle through again, then lift the right leg up and then the left leg to that, and then go into your landing. I really wouldn't recommend this for many high school jumpers. It takes a lot of speed and strength and mobility to get through the movement, but if you have an outstanding athlete, it might be something you can use maybe towards the end of their career, though. Now, one way of working on the flight phase is to use a box. To jump off the ground and land the pit, I mean, you're jumping in sand, but it's still the sand. It kind of hurts the body and wears the body down. You always want to save your athlete. I always believe in err on the side of caution. So one way to get the air time to work on the flight phase is use a box to jump up in the air. Now, you could take the box and put it on the side of a high jump pit and have the athletes come in and jump off the box into the pit and land on their rear with their feet in front of them. Or you can, and also you can take the box and put it here in front of the long jump pit, do a shorter jump approach, and jump off the pit into the sand. Grace is going to demonstrate now a little short approach box jump. Another great way of working on your in-flight technique is just to hang from a bar and work on driving your knees and lifting the feet out in front. You can work on your hang phase here. You also work obviously on your abdominal strength and also work on getting your feet out in front of you. I like to use this a lot to work on the hitch kick, because the hitch kick is a difficult movement, so you can kind of like program your body and learn the movement on the bar before you get into the sand. Chris is going to demonstrate right now. Now first you're going to lift the knees straight up. Just lift both knees up and extend out. Okay. Now bring them down. Now lift the knees up, just put the feet straight out without cycling. There you go. And you can work on your hang phase that way. Okay, now go down. Now knees up first, then put the feet out. Work on it that way also, then come down. And now go through the whole cycle, the whole jump. 1, 2, 3, and hold out there and hold and come down slowly. There you go. So you work on your programming to figure out your technique in the air, as well as working on those rock hard abs. One more way of working on your flight phase is actually to get in the pool, go to the deep end, and practice jumping off of the bottom of the pool and going through the technique you want to use, whether it's a hang or a hitch kick. It's really good for working the 2.5 hitch kick. Obviously, you have to hold your breath, work on your phases. It slows everything down, and plus the kids have a good time in the pool. You've been in that non-gravity environment.
The pool is great for training. It's a non-gravity environment. There's no stress on your joints, so you can practice your technique both for running and for jumping. And whether you're injured or healthy, it's a great way to get a challenging cardiovascular workout.
Now we're going to get to working on the landing. Okay, so with the landing, Grace is going to come up here and demonstrate how to work a standing long jump. So first what she's going to do is squat down with the small of the back flat. Okay, then she's going to drive the arms backwards, and then she's going to drive the arms forward, up and out, driving the knees towards the chest, and then the heels towards the edge of the pit. When she hits the ground, she's either going to try to hit the heels and then either fall sideways. Then the main thing you want to do is land in front of where your heels hit. Because when you're measuring the distance, they measure for the furthest mark back in the sand. So you don't want to hit your heels and then have your butt hit or your hand hit back. So you want to fall in front of your heels. So Grace is either going to go to the side, or she'll scoop through by either pulling her arms through and then pulling her body in the hole she made with her heels. Okay, Grace, demonstrate. Very nice. Kind of a combination of the two. She scooped through and went to the side, and as you can see, her heels hit here and her body hit in front of where her heels hit. That's the most important thing. It's terrible to get a great jump and then lose a foot by putting your hand back. Another variation of working on the landing is going from off of 1 foot. It's more similar to the jumping since you jump off of 1 foot. It's good to start with 2 feet, but then you want to start adding some speed to it. So now Grace is going to take 1 step back and then jump off 1 foot and have her drive knee go up into the air and work on her landing. One other drill to work on really pulling through, and that means putting your heels into the sand and pulling your hips over top of the sand, is to put a towel or a t-shirt out into the pit, have your athlete go from a standing or 1-step jump and try to dig their heels into the t-shirt and pull their hips through to mimic the actual jump. Grace? Good job.
Okay, this is how I count the rhythm on my world record jump. Head down, drive phase, and 1, 2, 3. Transition phase, 1, 2, 3. Attack phase, 1, 2. Penultimate step, push, pull, plant, punch the knee, knee, heel, heel. Dig the heels into the sand. Stand up and tell everybody, hey, I think I just broke a world record.
Okay, now there's a whole jump. Now you have to think about how you're going to train with your athlete. I suggest that you work on the full approaches at least one time per week. I would think you have to do at least 6 approaches. You can get in as many as 10. Take at least 5 minutes recovery in between each jump because you don't want to use the approaches as conditioning. You want to try to simulate meet atmosphere as much as possible to make sure the athlete's completely rested. I would recommend not really doing too many full approach jumps in practice. It really takes a lot out of the body. So use either a short approach from 6 or 7 steps or a half approach that goes back to 10 to 11 to 12 steps. That can really simulate the type of speed that you would have from a full approach. But like I said, you always want to save the body. You don't want to jump too much. And even then, I still only really like to jump maybe 1 day a week. The other day, do more plyometric exercises, and that'll be a DVD coming to you soon. One key thing in competing, really any sport, is visualization. Make sure before your athlete, every time before they jump, they visualize everything they're going to do. You don't want them to be out there mindlessly just running down the runway. Have them visualize going through their drive phase, going through their transition, going through their attack phase, going through the takeoff, going through the flight, and going through the landing. I mean, for me, when I jumped and I broke the world record, I visualized so far I could hear the crowd yelling. That's how far I was into my visualization. It takes some time, it takes some practice. When you first start, it's hard to even get like a blank screen. But if you practice enough, you can see yourself jumping, maybe first with just stick figures, and eventually you might be able to see yourself jumping in black and white, and then in color, and then maybe in different stadiums. The more practice you do, the better you'll jump and the easier it'll be. Because the more you think about it, your body can do it easier. It's like programming. You program into your mind, get rid of all the bad stuff, and input all the good stuff. Now here's a couple tips on competition. Make sure that your athlete in practice and in competition make sure they're not looking at the board. If the athlete looks at the board, they're going to overstride and step towards the board. When your athletes are doing their approaches, make sure to keep their eyes on the horizon and put their foot down where they would jump normally. Then, as a coach, you look and see how far behind the board or in front of the board they were, and then you go back and make the adjustment at the back of the approach. Don't make an athlete fit their approach into a number. Just have them run, and then you measure how far their run is. And when you first start teaching your approaches, make sure you start on the track. Don't start on the runway because the athlete's going to try to adjust to go to the board. Put them on the track, put down a tape measure, and just have the athlete run. And after doing 6 approaches, you'll get an idea of where they're going to land, and that's a good place to start with their approach. Okay, just a last few points to focus in on before I finish. Make sure that you're patient. It takes a long time to get this stuff done. It took me a long time to become a world record holder. I had to go from jumping 24 feet in college to 29 feet. It takes time. Be patient. That means you have to have a lot of repetition and a lot of consistency. But like I tell all my athletes, and the way that I always thought about competing, the most important thing is to have fun. If you're not having fun, it's not worth doing it. Have a good time and jump far.